Hey, Gordon.
Fancy seeing you here.
How are you doing?
Okay. Okay.
I guess I didn't realize until later on that yesterday that you were having internet trouble. I missed the first email about that.
That's okay. We worked out a solution.
Cool. Have they come and fixed yours yet, or are you still using your neighbors?
Still using the neighbors. The AT&T said that they could get a technician out here. Well, it depended on how much I was fussing at them and which, yeah, anyhow, it varied Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And I said, I don't need a technician. I need the router, the modem. Can I go pick one up? No, we have to ship it.
Yeah. Hey, John.
Masticate.
And they're starting to roll in.
Yeah. John, concerned to hear that your vehicle had a collision with another something.
Yeah, I was not in it.
Oh.
But my wife and my sister and brother-in-law were.
Hey.
And they made a mess out of it. Sherry's got to have an operation on her arm tomorrow. She jammed her wrist and lower arm, so they're going to have to install some hardware and stuff. So she's kind of freaked out about that. Sure, the car's totaled. It's a holiday weekend. I haven't heard anything from an insurance adjuster yet. But, whee!
Oh.
2020 can just suck it.
I've heard many people say, hey, if I could find a return department that would take this year, I would. Yeah, not a fun time.
Just a lot going on.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Alice?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Doing okay.
I got some yard work done today, and then I realized that I had sort of overdone it, so I got a nap in today. And I've Zoomed with some other people, and there's a giant spider hanging outside my study window. I just saw it. Can't tell what it is. Oh, well. Anyway, it's fine. It's not hurting anybody. So I've had a quiet and uneventful day. How about everybody else?
Fairly quiet. I woke up with some congestion. I was a little bit concerned, but I think it was just allergies.
I got a runny nose the other day, and the usual allergy medicine I take for it just wasn't working. And I thought, oh no, it's not one of the regular symptoms that they list for COVID. And I didn't have a fever at all. And I didn't have a sore throat, and I wasn't tired. But I was really very taken aback. And then eventually, it was clear it was nothing, which is great.
Cool.
What you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, every little strange thing gives you pause these days.
Yeah.
Did somebody just sneeze? What was that? Yeah.
Hi, Eunice.
Hello, Alice. Hi, guys.
Hey, Enos.
So I've been back at UT. I was walking across campus today to go to the pharmacy to get some stuff for Sherry ahead of her operation.
Yeah.
And off in the distance, I could hear the band practicing on their little practice field. And then over to the side, I could hear the football guys out grunting and groaning and running at each other over there. It was a very collegiate sort of a day, but it still felt strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had to cancel scrimmage on Saturday because 44 players weren't available.
Wow.
It wasn't all COVID, but it was a decent chunk of it.
I had to drive through campus through, on the strip the other day for whatever reason. And I saw maybe one or two people who looked like they were students wearing masks. And other than that, hi, Chloe.
Hello.
I saw no one wearing a mask.
Really?
Yeah, I know.
Where was this, Alice?
I had to drive down the strip the other day, and there were a lot of kids out. And, some of them were running in groups. They were, like had on their t-shirts and little shorts, and they were just, they were actually working. They were, and I'm sort of going, oh my goodness, if anyone, but.
That's why UT's numbers keep going up.
Yep.
James Madison just had to close down their in-person classes.
Who did?
James Madison.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know where that is.
It's over near, is it Stanton? It's a Virginia campus, but it's a pretty good sized school. So, but they'd run out of places they could quarantine people, and just their numbers were getting to the point where it was out of hand. Now UT rented an entire hotel to have places for people to quarantine.
And their quarantine's getting higher.
I wonder if they get out and party in the hall at night. At the hotel.
Wouldn't surprise
Not
me.
be surprised.
Okay. Let's see. Shaz says he can't find the link. I can send him the login numbers.
He may need his. Well, it's particular to each person. If he could just, it'll just take him a second to re-register. Let me see if I can get that going here. Well,
Yeah, I saved my original.
Hey, Chris.
Hey.
I'll be back. I need to take a moment.
Okay. So I guess that all 4 pages were there all along. It's just that I didn't have the right way to get them. And so.
Well.
Because it kept saying it was just on 1 page.
Sometimes machines lie to us. They mess with our heads.
But anyway, when I downloaded it into a program that then showed they were going down 4. So.
That's good.
So I was able to print them out.
Excellent. Well, it makes the game easier if you have a program to follow the.
That's what we're doing Taoist Tai Chi chanting on Saturdays. And so I printed out the chants that we do. But for All Souls Days, they added a few more, but you could just follow online on those.
Well,
he's got the new link. Just take him just a second to re-register, and then he should be good.
all right. Yeah.
I think Marion's coming.
She said she was.
Yeah, she did. We've just played a game with
She might
Marion.
have trouble finding her link.
There we go.
Yep.
If she can't, she will call me any minute.
It looks like you have company, Alice.
Yes, this is Miko. Say hello to everybody. Come on. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
She loves it when I Zoom because I am stuck here, so to speak. And she can get exactly what she wants in terms of scratching, and as much as she wants. So.
Yeah, well, it's good that there are some benefits to
Yes.
what we're going through.
You know, of course, obviously, in person is much better. But I am so thankful for Zoom because it lets me be in contact with people.
Me
And
too.
I live alone, and I still haven't adjusted to that after all these years. Not adjusted at all. But as long as I could see people on a fairly regular basis, I was doing okay. But until I realized that, yes, we could really Zoom and do stuff like this, I was thinking, my goodness, this is going to be horrible. And so Zoom has sort of saved my sanity.
Mm-hmm.
It really has.
It really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Although I hear people say, "Oh, I have 4 Zoom meetings today," or I get off this.
There's David and Mary Jo. Yay! Well, I don't see Mary Jo.
Every once in a while, I think what it would have been like to have lived in 1918 for that pandemic, when phones weren't common, no TV, no internet, maybe radio, maybe not. I'm not clear on that. Timing. It's really not as bad for us as long as we have our jobs and our families and friends are safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, everybody else is suffering. And I'm not just counting that.
Yeah, and there are people without
Yes.
as much.
Yeah, I mean, so for those of us who are privileged, it's not as bad as it could be. How's that?
Yeah, that's where I think we are.
And I would have never thought myself privileged before this.
Well, let's get going. Have a good crew here and onward from where we are.
Oh, there's us.
So, where?
That's what I wanted.
I don't want it on me. You're fine.
So,
I don't need it on either.
allegedly played by the ship's musicians as the Titanic was going. Need to unmute. I
I
think
said I used to know that, but I don't remember, and I decided I wouldn't cheat and look it up. Things go.
Oh yes, tell me about it.
Well, it was nearer, my God, to thee.
It was indeed, according to the stories. And why would that matter to us? Well, I have a book. The Unitarian Faith in Unitarian Hymns, published by the American Unitarian Association, and they don't confess a date, but it was sometime early 20th century. And they say Sarah Flower Adams lived 1805 to 1848, was an English Unitarian who wrote this in 1841 for use in the chapel in London, which she attended. British Unitarians, as I understand it, attended chapels because they were not regarded under British law for the longest time as really a church. They were heretics and dingbats.
Yeah.
They couldn't call their establishments churches. They could have a chapel. So she wrote it for her chapel. And they note this hymn is probably the most generally used of all the hymns of Unitarian authorship. True, maybe 1918. And who was the U.S. president who actually wrote some hymns that were sufficiently up to snuff that they've occasionally been used, well, not recently, but back a few decades, were occasionally used in hymnals? He, and that's not giving anything away, he was a little bit of a surprise. We've had 5 people who identified as Unitarians who served as U.S. presidents. And 2 of them fought the first dirty presidential campaign. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And then there was John's son, John Quincy Adams, who had a one-term presidency. He was not considered a very, very popular, very effective president. And then Millard Fillmore, who is one that we tend to sort of mutter the name. Again, not highly regarded. He signed the Fugitive Slave Act into law. He later ran for another term as president on the ticket of the Know Nothing Party. Millard is not one we're super proud of. And then William Howard Taft, who was a very active Unitarian layman. He served as moderator of the American Unitarian Association, sort of the board president.
Ohio.
Yeah.
And so, but it's sort of surprising. It was John Quincy Adams, who was kind of a dour New Englander, who wrote hymns. And I discovered this in this thing. American Unitarian Hymn Writers and Hymns, compiled by Henry Wilder Foote for the Hymn Society of America. And in June 45, I do have to say about John Quincy Adams. He was an unsuccessful president. He probably, until Jimmy Carter came along, John Quincy Adams was maybe the most successful past president, ex-president. He was elected to the House of Representatives and worked very effectively there on anti-slavery stuff until his death. But in June of 1848, he talks about, in his diary, he talks about being in church, the minister announcing the first hymn. It was my version of the 65th Psalm, and no words can express the sensations with which I heard it sung. Were it possible to compress into one pulsation of the heart the pleasures which, in the whole period of my life, I have enjoyed in praise from the lips of mortal man, it would not weigh a straw to balance the ecstasy of delight which streamed from my eyes as the organ pealed and the choir of voices sung the praise of Almighty God from the soul of David, adopted to my native tongue by me. That's not a dour New Englander. That's somebody who's kind of excited by hearing his work used in church. So strange are the ways of hymns and so on. But actually, John Quincy Adams is a good jumping off point for our discussion tonight as we take a look at our Unitarian Universalist value of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, because he's a good starting point in this search that has led us to be us today. In the early days of American Protestant churches, metrical verse based on the Psalms was one very common form of hymnody. They'd begun doing this during the Reformation and carried it across the ocean. It was obviously meaningful to John Quincy Adams that he took one of the Psalms and set it in verse in the appropriate meter to be sung. And this continued for a good while. I have an old Presbyterian hymnal. I acquire stuff and don't give it up easily. But this, which is losing its front cover, is Psalms and Hymns for the Worship of God, approved by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in the United States at its meeting in Memphis, Tennessee in November 1866. And it is metrical setting of psalms after metrical setting of psalms. Just the words with the notation as to the meter to be used in singing. And so this was the norm. We continue to use some of the tunes associated with those psalms every Sunday. Virtually every Sunday, we sing, "Let People Living in All Lands." That tune is called Old Hundredth. It was the setting in the Genevan Psalter for the 100th Psalm. So we use Old Hundredth as the tune to which we sing those more modern words. So in the early 19th century, both Unitarians and Universalists were creating new hymns of their own. I also have a Universalist hymnal from 1837 with lots of, I just wrote this sorts of hymns. None of them huge winners. But there began, and I'm sure both Unitarians and Universalists continued to use a lot of the old psalm tunes and words derived from the Psalms. But then the Transcendentalists came along, Ralph Waldo Emerson and his friends, and they created some ferment and stir, moving away from a strictly biblical focus in their faith. Emerson, when he spoke to the senior class at the Harvard Divinity School, to the great discomfort of the Divinity School faculty, gave actually some excellent advice on preaching. He said, what you need to do is give your people your life passed through the fire of thought. Well, this turned up in hymns too. So our first historic hymn writer is from this era, a man named Samuel Longfellow. And let me go back to Henry Wilder Foote and read what he had to say about Samuel Longfellow. Born in Portland, Maine in 1819. He was the youngest of the 8 children of Stephen and Zilpah Wadsworth Longfellow. Stephen Longfellow had graduated from Harvard and become one of the most prominent citizens of Portland. His son Samuel entered Harvard with the class of 1839, just after his brother, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, more than 12 years his senior, had returned from Europe to begin his professorship at Harvard. Harvard. Samuel entered the Harvard Divinity School, from which he graduated in 1846, and served as minister of the Unitarian Church in Fall River, Massachusetts, Second Unitarian Church, Brooklyn, New York, and Unitarian Church, Germantown, Pennsylvania. In the intervals between these pastorates, he did much occasional preaching, and having independent means and no marital ties, made several prolonged visits to Europe. He had an attractive personality, was witty and highly intelligent, and was an acceptable, although outspoken, preacher. But he is now remembered for his contribution to American hymnody through the hymns which he wrote and the books which he edited. His accomplishment in this field was greater and more lasting than that of any other American in the middle period of the 19th century. So, a significant contributor to American hymnody. And while he was still in the Divinity School, he and a classmate, Samuel Johnson, put together a book of more up-to-date hymns for a friend who complained that the hymn book in the church he had just been called to was truly deadly. Okay, we can make you a book of better hymns, many of which they wrote. So later, this book, put together by Samuel Longfellow and Samuel Johnson, was adopted by the notable Unitarian preacher Theodore Parker. In contrast to the books of Psalms, Parker called this the Book of Psalms, after the 2 authors. So that's the first hymn that I suggested we look at, is one from our hymnal, O Life That Maketh All Things New. And I think I think we have somebody prepared to give us a rendition. And if you want to sing along, you need to mute. I'm going to mute because you don't want to hear me singing. Chaz, John, which one of you is on?
You want to do it, Chaz? You want me to?
I've just been eating cheese, so
Hey, me too.
I'll be in good shape. Are you prepared with it? Go ahead.
I will give it a shot.
Okay.
Ooh, let's do that for a C. I'm playing, I just got a pitch pipe. Oh, that's a C sharp. Let's not do that. This is O Life That Maketh All Things New. Has everybody got a copy to follow along, or did Mark want to put up a screen share of the thing? It's your call. I will point out that at the bottom.
Of the hymn.
Pardon?
What's the number of the hymn? 12.
12? Oh, it's sideways.
That's the hymnal.
Number 12. Yeah.
I don't know if that's our hymnal or not. I am not sure where that came from.
Yes.
I would point out, though, down at the bottom of the page, there is both the name of the tune, in the bottom right corner is the name of the tune and the meter. And as our host has pointed out, you can interchange words by meter if you just match them up. So the LM down there stands for long meter, which is just a standard 4 lines of 8 syllables on each line, which is what this one is. If you look on the other ones, let's see, another standard one is, I forgot what the name of it is. It's the 8686, which is, I believe, the Yellow Rose of Texas, where you can sing almost all of the, what's her name's poems? Emily Dickinson poems, almost all fit to that particular meter. So let me get my C freshened up again. Oh, okay. Oh, life that maketh all things new, the blooming earth, our thoughts within, our pilgrim feet wet with thy dew, in gladness hither turn again. Want to do one verse or go on? Hearing nothing, I think I'll stop at one verse on that one.
The other 3 are right side up. If we get to those.
The third verse is particularly good, I think.
And those were modern words in their day, huh, Gordon?
You're muted, Gordon.
You're muted.
Go ahead and you can unmute him, Mark.
It's asking me to unmute him, but let's see if I can.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, those were very modern, maybe downright adventurous words in the 1840s. And it's interesting. Several things I'd point out here. One is that, okay, he does pick up the sort of references to nature that do turn up in the Psalms. Some of the Psalms are basically a deity saying, hey, I'm honked off at you and do better. But there's also some very rich natural imagery. Lay me down in green pastures beside still waters, is pretty good natural imagery. And one of the changes across time is that this had very gendered terminology in it until our most recent hymnal. in the first stanza, it talks about our thoughts within. It was written, the thoughts of men. Because men included everybody, right? Sure.
Yeah, still does.
And it's interesting, the notation on what this was written for. It was actually written, Samuel was a mature minister well on in his career, and this was written for the Free Religious Association in 1874. The Free Religious Association was sort of the continuation of revolt by Emerson and the young ministers who really were excited by Emerson and his ideas. By the late 1860s, early 1870s, there was a significant effort by more mainstream ministers to actually get Unitarianism organized. The American Unitarian Association was not an organization of congregations. It was an individual membership organization, which is totally mind-boggling now, but it was how they organized them. But after the Civil War, one of the ministers who had organized the Sanitary Commission, which evolved into the American Red Cross, tried to get Unitarians organized with a national conference of Unitarian churches, which involved congregations. The Free Religious Association wanted to stay a little more loosey-goosey than that. And apparently Samuel Longfellow was, with that faction, at least wrote this hymn for them. And I'm assuming that one doesn't write hymns for folks with whom one doesn't agree much. So there was this, and one other note, I appreciate John pointing out the notations down at the bottom, because this really is a good tool. When you're looking at a hymn, it notes words Samuel Longfellow, and there's a little flaming chalice next to his name. If we claim the author or composer as a Unitarian Universalist, that little flaming chalice is there. And so you can find out all sorts of things about what's going on.
Yes.
By the early 20th century, both Unitarians and many Universalists were combining a reverence for the Christian scriptures with ideas drawn from science, Charles Darwin, the arts, human experience. And the hymn writer and hymnal editor that I next want to point to is Vincent Silliman. He was a long-lived, long-active person. I had the pleasure of actually knowing him. We were in a ministerial study group together. Toward the end of his 62-year ministry. 62 years. That's a long, long time. Actually, for a while, I thought that I wanted to have the Vincent Silliman retirement plan. At the point I knew Vincent, he had moved to a smaller church, and he said, I think my next move might be to a part-time ministry. He didn't live to make that move to a part-time ministry. He essentially died in the traces. He preached up to the, I think, last month of his life. he, unlike Samuel Longfellow, born into a Unitarian family with a prominent Unitarian brother, Vincent Silliman grew up in Minnesota, small town Minnesota, in a family that worshiped regularly at the Baptist church. And he became a Unitarian in college. He never served a large congregation, but his ministry had a huge impact. In addition to having a hand in every hymnal from 1935 to 1964, he recruited to Unitarianism the leading Unitarian preacher of the mid-20th century, A. Powell Davies. A. Powell Davies and Vincent Silliman met while they were both serving congregations in Portland, Maine. Davies, Britain of Welsh background, was a Methodist at that point, serving a Methodist congregation. And Vincent brought him over to, said, you know, really, your ideas would fit so very well in Unitarianism. So in 1933, A. Powell Davies was called to the Unitarian Church in Summit, New Jersey. 11 years later, in 1944, he was called to the very important pulpit of All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., he became minister to senators and Supreme Court, at least one Supreme Court justice, Douglas. And Judy tells the story. She joined All Souls. She got to hear A. Powell Davies preach and joined that church. That's the beginning of her Unitarian and Universalist career. But he put off writing his sermons until Saturday, because who knew what Congress would do that might need to be addressed in Sunday's sermon. But his significance to Unitarianism is that from the base of this church in Washington, D.C., he spun off 5 satellite congregations in Maryland and Virginia. Virtually all of them started by his encouraging a cluster of people who were members of All Souls to work in their community, to find a meeting place, and the service would be piped in by telephone line. So they would hear the service at All Souls. And once the congregation built up enough, they would get their own building, call a minister. Those are 5 strong congregations now that have spun off congregations of their own. So he had a major effect on post-war growth in Unitarianism. So that was a side effect of the kind of person that Vincent Silliman was. I was a young man in my 20s, very, very wet behind the ears when I knew him. A lot of ministers of his age and stature really did very much well, Sonny, you'll finally get to understand all the important things. He was not like that. He was a warm, humble, friendly human being to be with. And he wrote some hymns. He may have been most important as an editor and compiler. He was also a very good writer. But let's see. Actually, let me give a writing sample here. This is a Vincent Silliman responsive reading. Let religion be to us life and joy. Let it be a voice of renewing challenge to the best we have and may be. Let it be a call to generous action. Let religion be to us a dissatisfaction with things that are, which bids us serve more eagerly the true and right. Let it be the sorrow that opens for us the way of sympathy, understanding, and service to suffering humanity. Let religion be to us the wonder and lure of that which is only partly known and understood. An eye that glories in nature's majesty and beauty, and a heart that rejoices in deeds of kindness and of courage. Let religion be to us security and serenity because of its truth and beauty, and because of the enduring worth and power of the loyalties which it engenders. Let it be to us hope and purpose, and a discovering of opportunities to express our best through daily tasks. Religion uniting us with all that is admirable in human beings everywhere, holding before our eyes a prospect of the better life for humankind, which each may help to make actual. This is good stuff. And he wrote a couple of hymns that are in our current hymnal. Morning So Fair to See is a good sample of what he wrote. Gentlemen, would one of you care to hold forth on that?
This is the tune that I grew up with in Presbyterian Church. It was Fairest Lord Jesus.
Oh.
Morning so fair to see, night veiled in mystery, glorious the earth and resplendent skies. Yeah, I don't have the right glasses on. Pilgrims, we march along, singing our joyous song, as though an earthly paradise. Ran out of air. I noticed that all three of these hymns you picked, Gordon, have the word pilgrims in them. That was a common theme apparently in the 19th century, or this is the 20th century lyrics, right?
Yeah. That just happened, but it is a frequent theme. And yeah, good. Glad you picked up on that.
Well, I've been lately studying the relationship between our indigenous population and the government ever since the beginning of white folks on these shores. And I don't have a whole lot of respect for pilgrims and their ilk anymore.
Yeah, there are problems with that particular bunch, and those of us who trekked in after. But when one thinks of pilgrimage to places rather than we have discovered America and claim it.
Yeah.
Those aren't really people who are here ahead of us, which is kind of absurd. Yeah, it, and again, the language has changed over time. It is less gendered in her current hymnal than it was. The tune, Schönster Herr Jesu, German for Dearest Lord Jesus, Fairest Lord Jesus, was originally a Silesian folk song. And actually the pilgrim image, faith is a pilgrimage. It's not a static thing, but it's a movement. And in that sense of pilgrimage, I think we can be comfortable with it as sort of a conquering thing. No, not good. So later in the 20th century, past the mid-20th century, right after the Unitarian Universalist merger, a new hymnal came out. The hymnal that I grew up with, it's called Hymns of the Spirit. Big, chunky book with, well, I think the writers and composers mostly fit the category DWM, dead white males.
Oh.
The white male piece largely continued with this hymnal, Hymns for the Celebration of Life, which was published in 1964, 3 years after the completion of the merger of Unitarian and Universalist organizations. And much of the work on that, again, was done by Vincent Silliman, but there was a younger man, a sort of new kid on the block, Kenneth Patton. It's the third hymn writer we'll look at. Patton grew up in Michigan in a strict Methodist church, then moved with his mom to suburban Chicago. After college, he served some small Disciples of Christ congregations in Illinois while he was attending seminary at the University of Chicago. And at the University of Chicago Div School, he encountered some thoroughly humanist professors who moved him in that direction. One of them told him, you really belong in the Unitarian Church. And so in 1942, Ken Patton was called to the First Unitarian Church in Madison, Wisconsin. Two things distinguish his ministry in Madison. I had not focused on the fact that Ken was the minister there when they built their current main building. They did something that is really not wise. They used as their architect a member of the congregation. This is often a recipe for disaster. But this particular fellow,
And was frozen for a second.
this particular fellow created two striking structures for Unitarian or Universalist congregations. Unity Temple in Oak Park, Illinois.
Frankly, right.
The meeting house for the First Unitarian Church of Madison, Wisconsin. This was Frank Lloyd Wright. And there are some quirks about the building. Mr. Wright was no longer young when he created the building. but expected that he would at least once a year be invited to speak from the pulpit. And so it's the only church I know of that has located behind the chancel a small restroom. Convenience of the speaker. And there's some other quirks. Judy and I got to use home hospitality one time when we were going to a meeting in Madison, and turned out our hosts, the husband in the couple, had served as building and grounds chair for the church. And he said, Mr. Wright was a great architect. He was not a great engineer. There was this little problem that the building was sort of sinking on the two ends, and they had to get it back up. But it, both those buildings are worth seeing. So Ken Patton presided over that. The other thing that really drew attention, got him some nationwide notice and notoriety, was one time in a radio talk in Madison, he was talking about racial justice. And he said that he felt that he should resign from the white race and become a colored man. For the time, that was extreme. Anyhow, he had a 7-year ministry in Madison with some significant success. And in 1949, he was called to establish a Universalist congregation in Boston, the Charles Street Meeting House. Now, what had happened to the Universalist churches in Boston was they had died. There were Universalist churches in the Boston suburbs, but not in the city of Boston. Universalist headquarters was in Boston, but there was no congregation there. And so the superintendent of the Massachusetts Universalist Convention, sort of the staff person for that area, wanted to get a congregation established. They acquired a striking building, a brick colonial style building on Charles Street, 1 or 2 blocks from the Boston Common, prime location. And he persuaded this young radical guy to move from Madison, Wisconsin to Boston. And Ken Patton loved to do. He was a doer. He totally redesigned the church. The chancel, instead of being a sort of bare space with a cross hanging in it, he painted and hung a mural of the Andromeda galaxy. So there was this galaxy that you saw in the chancel space. He created on the floor of the sanctuary a map, a projection map, a polar projection of the world. He had symbols of the world's religions created and placed around the sanctuary. A bookcase of multiple scriptures. And he became a prolific writer of hymns and responsive readings. One year, he challenged himself. He said, typically a minister will write a sermon, probably a meditation or prayer, maybe one other element of the service. He challenged himself to also write a hymn for every service. And produced a book out of that. And he moved along in this direction of a more nature-focused, more humanist-focused kind of lyrics. And the song we're going to hear in a minute is very, very humanist in its orientation. Ken Patton was a different critter than Vincent Silliman. Vincent Silliman was warm and caring. He was a people person. Ken Patton was a prickly character. And yet, at the end of his life, Ken Patton put together a collection of all the hymns he had, ever written. Hymns of Humanity, he called it. And that's not a skinny book. I was looking at it the other day, preparing for this, and I looked at the dedication. Ken Patton dedicated this to Vincent B. Silliman, revered friend and colleague, whose creative labors on hymns and readings of our Free Religious Fellowship consumed an incredible number of happy hours of his long and dedicated ministry. Okay, he was crusty, but he wasn't totally without feeling. So why don't we get a strong dose of humanism. I'll tell you a little bit more about it after we hear it.
Do you want to do this one, Tina? Oh, you're muted. It's Ein feste Burg.
Probably not. No. Go ahead.
John, you're muted now.
We are the earth, upright and proud. In us the earth is knowing. Its winds are music in our mouths. In us its rivers flowing. The sun is our hearth on fire, warm with the earth's desire, and with its purpose strong, we sing the pilgrim's song. In us the earth is growing.
Very good.
Yeah.
A long time.
A mighty fortress.
Yep.
And I suspect that Ken did this with malice aforethought, taking the most Protestant of Protestant Christian hymns and giving it these very humanistic words. Actually, there's sort of a double irony here, because the standard American translation of A Mighty Fortress was done by a Unitarian minister, Frederick Henry Hedge. And so, full circle, two Unitarians doing words for that tune, one of them true to Luther, one 180 degrees from Luther. And Patton did some marvelous things. He was not, as I say, the warm, fuzzy colleague of mine. But David Bumbaugh, minister and scholar himself, summed up Patton's work this way: it was he who taught a monotone rationalism how to sing. It was he who taught a stumble-footed humanism how to dance. It was he who cried, "Look!" and taught our eyes to see the glory in the ordinary.
Wow.
Wow.
And I think he really did bump things up. Now, the point in hitching this production to the fourth principle is, yes, really we are on a search which we try to make free and responsible. We're not a destination. We're in motion. Just came across a comment by my friend Mark Harris about our hymnody. He commented, authors and texts represent many in current, okay, sorry. He's talking about our most recent hymnal, the one, the gray hymnal that we use at church. Authors and texts represent many more worldwide cultures and living people than any previous hymnal collection, and the language employed is inclusive of both men and women. Throughout liberal religious history, hymn texts have been written, rewritten, and adapted to fit the changing theological needs of the times. Hymns have given Unitarian Universalists a way to sing texts that echo their common beliefs: faith in human potential, the wonders of nature as revelation of the divine, and the struggle for justice and peace. Yeah, we have changed over time. I can't say every single change is one that I find myself applauding. Some of the modern productions, I think, oh, well, yeah, it was a nice try. But it doesn't work for me. But there really has been significant change over time. And I was looking at that. I think our hymns reflect that movement, from the Psalms to celebration of nature to humanism, not obliterating what was valuable in the past, but adding to it. And the responsive readings in the hymnals reflect this. The three major hymnals of the 20th century by Unitarian and Universalist or Unitarian Universalist organizations. In 1937, the hymnal I grew up with, there were 59 biblically derived responsive readings, 19 non-biblical responsive readings. With the 1964 hymnal, there were still 50 biblical responsive readings, but there were 17 from other religious traditions and 72 other, authored by people or groups outside the biblical tradition. The 1993 hymnal, the one that we mostly use, has 43 biblically based responsive readings, but 92 from a variety of other sources. So we've broadened our scope. As Mark observed, we've reached much wider sources of this material. It's no longer just dead white males of European ancestry. Our language is more inclusive. For us and others, even the technology has changed over time. And preparing for our time together, I was interested in what I discovered. As I said at the outset, that 1866 Presbyterian hymnal, there was no music. It was just the words, and they noted the meter and maybe suggested which tunes would be good. And I found on my shelves this 1880 publication, Unity Hymns and Chorals, out of Chicago. And it had an interesting setup. The words to various hymns are down below, and the top part of the page, you could turn to get various tunes. The words, suggested where you might want to turn for best match to tune. And then there was this 1918 hymnal from the American Unitarian Association, or 1914 hymnal, with words below to two different hymns and the tune up above. So you could sing either set of the words to that. And now to the contemporary, including the paperback hymnal that we have. And I'm wondering, I've heard some people say these may be the last hymnals that get printed. We may, in the near future, go all electronic and project them, or say, okay, everybody pick up your cell phone and the words will, will appear there. All interesting. Who knows where we'll go in this continuing process that we're part of. So, before we part, any questions, any comments, any? I've enjoyed hearing more from you in the course of this one than in the past.
Well, it was very enjoyable, Gordon. Thank you.
Well, I realized doing this, sometime I'd love to pair with somebody who's an actual musician, which I am not. I've been called many things, that's not one of them. And, maybe offer a romp through the hymnal, because lots of these things have interesting stories behind them. And, for the most part, we don't share them. And, we just think, oh, well, this is an okay hymn, or, oh, where did this hymn come from? And sometimes there are interesting stories about where they came from. Chloe.
I had a question. John was talking about the numbers. Mm-hmm. Well, one had two letters, and that meant something.
Yes.
The L, M, and then the ones with the numbers. I can't wrap my head around what that means.
Okay, that's a description of the meter. Yeah, John?
There's a number of syllables in the line. So if you count the beats as you're going through each of those lines,
okay.
It should add up.
Do it for example.
We are the earth upright and proud. So that's 8. We are the earth upright and proud. In us, the earth is knowing, which is the 7.
No. No.
Right? So looking at we are the earth upright and proud. You follow that?
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah, it works like that. So if you look in the back of the hymnal, you'll see all these different numbers, and any of those numbers, they'll have a list of the hymns that use that metric, that meter, and that's where you can swap them out. So there are a lot of tunes in there that are multiple times with different sets of words.
No.
Who'd have thought?
Well, one of the new hymns in the Great Hymnal is "Lady of the Season's Laughter." It's not one that we have used very much,
Yeah.
but my friend Kendall Gibbons wrote that, and she actually had a totally different tune in mind. But the hymn book commission said, well, I think it was actually a Christmas hymn. And they said, yeah, people are going to get some dissonance singing those words to that tune. Oh, here's one, same meter, doesn't have those associations.
Drop it in.
Yeah. And it really made a difference in the usability of that hymn. Yep, that's the animal. But next month, we will be doing something very different, looking at the right of conscience and use of the democratic process within our congregation and in society at large. And I'm going to be asking, okay, religiously, what do we do when democratic process isn't working, when society is broken? And there's some interesting possibilities of Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists who dealt with that in all sorts of different ways. So that's where we're going next month. And I've kept you a little longer than intended. Oh, and I haven't looked at what's been coming up in the chat. I really should. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
7:38. Scroll back to 7:38 p.m. There you were. Remember that? When you did the conversation with Henry David Thoreau?
Yes, yes.
And there it was in my old hymnal.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was fun. I remember that.
Me too.
Yeah. So
This has been fascinating. Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I love
Gordon.
those old hymns, even with the Christian words.
yeah. Well, obviously, I think hymns are kind of important, and they, maybe we need to do that, walk through the hymnal sometime.
Yeah.
The main thing I've gotten from tonight is just an awareness of how important the hymns are in holding on to tradition and bringing the past into the present, but also how they move us forward.
Yeah.
That putting new words to old tunes, or even, as happens a lot in the Teal hymnal, new tunes and new words
Yeah.
move us forward. And a lot of the new stuff will drop by the wayside as the years go by because it's not that good. But we have to have it. It's like, there were so many other composers in Mozart's day, but we basically just listened to his music because it was better than everybody else's. That's not 100% true, but the quality stuff keeps us in our tradition and teaches us who we are. And as somebody said in chat, that the emotions of the service are carried mostly in the music.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah. It truly is. It truly is. Well, thanks for being along for
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Well,
Everyone.
next month.
You.